Michigan's 2026 football schedule is now finalized, and it is no joke. We'll break it all down next on this week's episode of Michigan Podcast.
But there's going to be one team that's going to play solely as a team. No man is more important than the team. No coach is more important than the team. The team, the team, the team.
Looks deep for Anthony Clark. Waits for it. Gets caught.
They said you can't beat Ohio State. Now what?
Brady gets terrific. Throws it. Get it. Touchdown. Knight again. Schultz just before Brazil got him. And a leaping interception by Woodson.
Harbaugh back to throw over the middle. Caught by Collier at the 5 on his feet. Touchdown, Michigan. On its way. It's good.
He's 5'7", 179 pounds, a junior at Michigan. But Jamie Morris packs a wallop, and he delivers for Bo Schembechler.
And here's your first play. Pressure coming. Sack. It is Glenn Steele, number 81, who fought his way through the traffic.
Option. And Robinson calls his own number, and he's going to score. Oh, an easy touchdown for Robinson and Michigan.
Win it. We're going to win the championship again because we're going to play as a team. And when we play as a team and the old season is over, you and I know it's going to be Michigan again. Michigan.
Go Blue. I'm Steve Deace. Welcome to this week's episode of Michigan Podcast. And yes, as I said there at the top, Michigan's 2026 football schedule is finalized, and this is not a laugher like last year's was. Now, but here's the thing. You know, there is a rhythm to it. If you were going to have to play these teams, like I think Ohio State's schedule is definitely harder than ours. I think Ohio State's playing one of the toughest schedules I can ever remember them having to play. Oregon's schedule is pretty hard. Indiana's is not as hard as ours, but it's the hardest one they've played the last few years, including playing Michigan and Ohio State back to back. A lot of the top tier Big Ten teams, Iowa has a very tough schedule. A lot of the top end Big Ten teams, Penn State notwithstanding, were given pretty tough draws. But there is kind of a rhythm to this. If you were going to have to play this slate of teams, I would argue then playing them in a schedule laid out like this is, I wouldn't call it optimal, because when you're playing Ohio State, Oregon, and Indiana in the same year, I mean, when Penn State's your fourth or fifth toughest game, okay, that's never an optimal situation from a schedule standpoint. But if you're going to give yourself the best shot against this slate of opponents, I think the way this lays out does it. So Michigan has 6 games on the schedule that I would rank as very likely wins, right? Western Michigan, UTEP, at Minnesota, at Rutgers, Michigan State at home, UCLA at home. Those 6 teams, Michigan definitively has superior talent to. So, I mean, it would be considered an upset of magnitude. Probably Michigan is favored by 10 or more in every single one of those games. And so that's an 85% minimum chance of winning. So then there's a couple of other games where I would lean Michigan. Iowa at home, I'd lean Michigan. Penn State at home, I'd lean Michigan. So what does that mean? That means those are games where Michigan would be favored probably by a touchdown or less. And so those are games where you're leaning the Wolverines' way. That gets you to 8 if you hold serve in those games. Then there are a couple of games where I would say those are toss-ups. I'd say Indiana at home is a toss-up. I'd say Oklahoma at home early is a toss-up, meaning that's a game that's going to be within a field goal either way. And then there's a couple of games there where I think Michigan is the definitive underdog, meaning Michigan, as it stands right now, based on what we know of the rosters right now in public perception, Michigan would probably be a touchdown or more as an 7 to 10 point underdog. And that would be at Oregon and at Ohio State. Now, obviously that's based on what we know of the rosters here today as we're recording this at the end of February. So if you were going to have to play a schedule where Penn State's your fourth or fifth toughest game in a given year, then you're still laying it out where there's 8 really likely wins on this schedule for the Wolverines. So, again, not easy by any stretch of the imagination. And it's very possible. Hey, listen, a lean, you could still lose to Penn State at home. You could still lose to Iowa at home, right? And maybe make that up somewhere else. Okay. But if you're going to have to play 3 of the top 5 teams in the final poll on your schedule the next year, then you want to pair that with a schedule where there's plenty of other spots where you're going to pick up wins as well. And then there's kind of like a rhythm to it. There's a stretch on the schedule where Ohio State plays at USC, Oregon, and I can't remember who it is. Oh, Indiana. All in a row in some order. That's crazy. In fact, thank you, Aaron. Aaron just put that up for us. All right. So Ohio State has a schedule where they play Indiana at USC and then Oregon at home. That's difficult. And then they're at Iowa just a couple of weeks before that. And hey, Iowa is a good team on the road. Iowa is like a elite team when you play them at home, right? This is, again, that Ohio State schedule. And then you've got maybe preseason number 1 Texas there. I mean, there's legit 4 potential losses. 4 games where you could say it's not a big upset if Ohio State loses, even before you get to the Michigan game at the end of the year, right? In this schedule, you get the Western Michigan game, and hey, they were decent for a MAC team, but Michigan's going to overwhelm them. And so you essentially have 2 weeks to prepare for Oklahoma. And then you play UTEP after that, so you can put everything in that Oklahoma game. Absolutely everything to kind of make an early statement if you're Kyle Whittingham, because you've got a de facto bye against one of the worst teams in FBS football, UTEP, the next week. All right, you open up at home against Iowa, very good opponent, Hall of Fame coach. The problem that Iowa has stylistically up against Michigan is Michigan has a lot of the same stylistics and culture and ideologies about the game that Iowa does, just recruits better players. All right. And Michigan's record all time in Big Ten openers is like some disgusting, incredible 85% win number. At Minnesota, Minnesota's okay as a program, but that would be in the likely win category for me as a program that Michigan definitively recruits better than, meaning there's maybe only a few players on the Minnesota roster that would start for us. Then you get a bye. So you get 2 weeks now to prepare for the Penn State Cyclones or the Iowa State Nittany Lions, whatever you want to call them, right? And then you've got the defending national champions coming in the very next week with Indiana. But then after that, you get Rutgers on the road. You're going to be a huge favorite in that game. Maybe Michigan State will be more professional in year 1 under Pat Fitzgerald. We'll see. He's a good coach, but he also coached in the pre-NIL era. So let's see what happens here. But in year 1, that's still kind of a total rebuild of a roster. So you're a definitive favorite there. You go on the road to Oregon. Let's not joke around. I mean, that's not good. That might be the most unwinnable game on the schedule. Because Michigan has won the last 2 trips to Columbus, in fact. But then you come back, you've got UCLA, who I think will be improved. And I saw that Joel Klatt had them stock up in his most recent podcast with some of their moves. But you're getting them in late November, cross country, right? I mean, that's a good scenario if you're Michigan, and then you have the game at the end. And so there's not really a stretch except for Penn State and Indiana back to back, but you have the bye before that. There's not really a stretch of games you're like, boy, the wear and tear on that's going to get to you. A lot of it is big game against Oklahoma, but you play Western Michigan the week before and UTEP the week after. Big game against Iowa, but you played UTEP the week before, right? Big game against Penn State, but you got to bye. All right. So the game, but you play UCLA cross country at home before that, right? So there's not really that killer stretch. It's a killer slate of opponents, but they're not really in a killer stretch of games. And so that gives an opportunity for this team to demonstrate what I think it will on the field. I think you're going to see the difference in how much better coach this team is with the massive coaching staff upgrade. I heard Bud Elliott talking about this on the 24/7 or Cover 3 podcast, I should say, talking about coordinator carousel and what teams took out to him. He said it was Michigan on both sides of the ball. I mean, the coordinator upgrades for Michigan and the overall coaching staff upgrade is noticeable. And I think you're going to notice that right away when the season starts for sure. All right, so let's take a break. We come back. Mark Rogers is going to join us, and maybe he's got a little bit more cynical view of all this as our resident Bucknut friend, and we'll find out right after this. All right, back here on Michigan Podcast, and we're joined by our good friend Mark Rogers. Check out his page, The Voice of College Football. Does a lot of great coverage of the great and beautiful game year-round with correspondents and stringers covering even during the off-season when maybe you can get some very, shall we call it, valuable information. Mark, good to see you, brother. It's been a minute, and thank you for your patience. Always good to have you back with us on Michigan Podcast.
I know it's Steve. Good to see you. Good to see Aaron, and appreciate you inviting me. As always, I never take for granted the invitation from a quote-unquote enemy.
So, we brought you on here to talk about Michigan's schedule, but if you don't mind, let's start by talking about your favorite team's schedule, right? Because when you're not being the voice of college football, you're just being another insane completely obnoxious bucknut, and you take all those things as compliments, of course. Listen, I'll tell you, there's no such thing as a non-insufferable Michigan fan. It's a run-on sentence, right? Okay. But I repeat myself, right? Am I wrong that you all might be playing the hardest schedule I can remember Ohio State playing in a minute, right? I mean, I think there's legit 4 losable games on the schedule even before we get to the game. Even before we get to the game, I think there are 4 games that it's completely credible Ohio State could lose those games. And not just the Buckeyes. Oregon's got a very tough schedule as well. Indiana's schedule is not quite as hard as Oregon, Ohio State's, and Michigan's, but it's harder than it's been the last few years, including playing Michigan and Ohio State in back-to-back weeks. The only one of the dynamic recruiting programs in our state that I would say, or in our league that I would say has a manageable schedule is Penn State. But there's we had that schedule last year. And the problem with it is if Penn State goes 10-2, but the 2 losses are the only 2 games that anybody cares about, there's no other great win there from a playoff perspective, right? So that's kind of the trade-off, is you almost have to go 11-1 against that schedule if you're Penn State. But before we get to Michigan, your kind of meta thoughts there, and starting with the Buckeyes.
Well, Steve, if you're following, will allow a little, maybe a refresher, maybe a history lesson as we delve into Big Ten history here. So my issues with the previous schedules of years gone by. So, of course, I'm going to go the Ohio State biased route here. 1981, a tie for the Big Ten championship with Iowa. The 2 teams did not play. We know, the 2 of us, what the tiebreaker system was at the time. Oh, you most recently went to the Rose Bowl. You don't get to go to the Rose Bowl. And a much superior Ohio State team was left to play in the Liberty Bowl, and Iowa got scalped by 4 touchdowns at the Rose Bowl. The next season, you will recall, Ohio State has a fairly dominant win against Michigan in the shoe to finish 7-1 in the Big Ten. Michigan, though, came into the game at 8-0. Therefore, they finished 8-1, and that was the one that really blew my top. Michigan's 8-1, Ohio State 7-1. Can we not do math in this league? That just irked me beyond belief. Michigan goes on to the Rose Bowl. Ohio State does not. So now I never thought once those type of issues got corrected that we would arrive at a place in this league where the scheduling would be worse and would provide us with worse consequences than those scenarios and those examples. But Tony Petitti gave us a great indicator, Steve, when he took over this league. In the first week or 2 after taking over, he said something to the effect of, my 2 goals in this conference are to, number 1, get the marquee teams to play each other on a more regular basis. We're going to see better games against the elite competition within the league in late October and November. And then right after that, he said, and my other goal is to get as many teams from this league into the college football playoff as possible. So my initial reaction was, how do you accomplish both of those? Well, we've obviously seen what he's been able to put together and help force and push, and wants to take even further steps to reach those 2 goals. So that brings us to a place, and obviously the realignment and expansion where, and this is the case for all conferences, but the Big Ten is the worst violator of this, having 18 teams, is that you have the greatest disparity between the strength of schedules across the league. When you have 9 league games, you have 8 other possible opponents, but that are missed. You have such this variation of schedule strengths where, Steve, Michigan had a pretty brutal schedule 2 years ago, cakewalk last year. Then they're running into a schedule this year at 46-35. Those are the opponents' 2025 records. composite, 46-35. That's 13 games tougher for Michigan than last season's schedule. Ohio State's, to your point, is 6 games tougher than Michigan's schedule this year at 52-29. And I think even beyond that, Steve, is, you expect to beat Minnesota. So replacing a 5-4 Minnesota team versus a 3-6 UCLA team, doesn't even bake into the numbers. It's more about, do you play the elites? Do you play the elites? And both of these schools basically do, although Michigan gets a break in not playing USC as a comparison point here. Ohio State goes to Indiana. They go to USC. They go to Iowa, which they're almost a different program, a different team at Kinnick Stadium. They also have Illinois, Steve, and Michigan does not. So while Michigan certainly plays a formidable schedule, Ohio State catches no breaks except maybe no Penn State.
Face the preseason number 1 team in the non-conference at Texas. So again, I think it's one of the toughest schedules I can ever remember Ohio State playing as a fan, for sure. And I think when you look at, I don't know how much you've had a chance, I'm guessing, since you're the voice of college football, quite a bit more than me. When you look at the composite SEC schedule as well, now that they're adding the 9th game here for this season, I think it's pretty much a lock that between the SEC and the Big Ten, at least one 3-loss team is getting an at-large berth this coming year in the playoff. Now, that third loss might be a conference championship game loss, maybe, but I just think these teams, the recruiting is so spread out now too, right? You're not just rolling hockey lines of depth at the defensive line like Michigan did and Georgia did and Ohio State did and Alabama did and Clemson did during their years of dominance. I think there's going to be at least one 3-loss team in the college football playoff as an at-large. Maybe that third loss is a conference championship game, but I think that's going to be a routine thing, whether we expand this thing or not. And we are eventually, and maybe even very soon, because there's just too many tough games in all these, in the 2 toughest leagues now.
Yeah, I think I'll be off by 1 season on that prediction, because I did predict both the Big Ten and the SEC to place 3-loss teams into the college football playoff this past season. But I totally agree with you that they're loading up in conference, and obviously, as you mentioned, with the expansion of the SEC in conference schedule from 8 to 9 games, that obviously you're taking 16 teams and you're playing 16 additional games, or 8 games that they normally would go out and win all 8 games, or at the very least, an insignificant team like a Vanderbilt from the past would lose to Middle Tennessee or somebody that wouldn't really matter. So 8-0, you're replacing with 4-4 composite. And so you're tacking on 4 more losses for the entire conference. So absolutely, I see 9-3 teams making it out of either or both leagues. And just to further a point here, to get this one across, Steve, just think about the narrative surrounding going league-wide. A Wisconsin over the last 2 years, which has been dumpster fire, Fickle should get fired, versus Matt Rule. Not necessarily that he's done a great job, but people are fairly accepting of going to bowl games and Nebraska being better than they were against Scott Frost. But when you really delve into these schedules and the performances against these teams, has Nebraska really been better than Wisconsin? They've been playing nearly the worst composite teams over this 2-year span versus Wisconsin playing the best. And if you really look game to game, when Nebraska doesn't play Ohio State, Oregon, Indiana, Illinois, and Wisconsin does, that's the result that I don't like to see is just 2 teams that line up where the records are vastly different, and really the performance of the 2 teams in the same conference is not. And that's been the result of this uneven scheduling.
Well, let's get to your thoughts then on Michigan's schedule this year. And what are I laid out some of my big picture thoughts. I have 6 games on a 12-game schedule that, for me, Michigan would be a touchdown favorite or more. So I think those would be, if they were to lose, those would be considered absolute upsets. Then there's a couple of other games: Iowa at home, Penn State at home. I would say that gets you to 8, where Michigan, with the home field, probably 3 to 5 point favorite in those games, as based on what we know know today, right? We're sitting here at the end of February, right? And then I think there are games where they clearly be an underdog at Ohio State, at Oregon. I think they're clearly underdogs in those games, in those two. And then I think you have the Indiana and Oklahoma games, I would rate right now as toss-up scenarios within a field goal either way. That's kind of how I broke it down. Overall, I like kind of the rhythm to the schedule. If you were going to play these teams, right, if you're going to play a schedule where you're going to play Ohio State, Oregon, Indiana, and then have, the non-conference to Oklahoma, I like how they are spread out. For the most part, you do have the thing where you've got Penn State and Indiana back to back, but you have a bye there to kind of kick off that stretch at the exact same time. So it's not an easy schedule, but if you're going to have to play these opponents, I think the rhythm of it is about as favorable as you could ask for, given the slate of opponents that they were going to be required to play. But what do you think?
Yeah, well, that's a good point. Ohio State has a 3-game run of Indiana, Oregon, USC in some order. I don't have the schedule in front of me, where Michigan does have the pacing of difficult games, semi-difficult, maybe somebody thrown in there, a Rutgers or Michigan State back-to-back. I see at one point in early November. But here are my thoughts that I think that Kyle Whittingham is really going to put a lot of emphasis on this Oklahoma game. I think he sees this as an opportunity. Obviously, there's an incentive for payback. They were embarrassed to a certain extent. They've got Oklahoma at home. I would expect the Sooners, based on just having a conversation, actually reviewing both the Oklahoma offense and defense with Parker Thune of On 3 just a few days ago, that Oklahoma is going to be better on offense. I don't know if the defense can play quite as good as it has the last couple of years under Brent Venables, because they had a top 5 unit on that side of the football, regardless of what the analytics tell us. But the games that stick out to me in regards to great Michigan season, or do they take a step back? Iowa, again, different team, different program at home versus on the road. And of course, Michigan's got them at the big house, and they've dominated that series in recent years since the upset at Kinnick. But Iowa certainly showed us something this past season, playing Oregon to the wire, playing Indiana to the wire, USC to the wire, as opposed to they went through about a 4-year stretch where they were just getting annihilated by anybody with a top 10 number next to their name. So I'm very interested to see that matchup. And then, of course, Penn State. The talent is still there. Matt Campbell, of course, taking over, and what Matt Campbell is going to bring to Penn State football. So that's an interesting pair right there. And Pat Fitzgerald at Michigan State, not that they're going to be a challenge, but it brings maybe a boost to the rivalry back for that matchup right there.
You see, I love what you just said about emphasis on the Oklahoma game, because you've got UTEP the very next week, one of the weakest teams in FBS football. And so you don't have to worry about a letdown there. I mean, you can absolutely put all your focus into that game against Oklahoma, and it's kind of funny, Mark. The two teams, the programs have switched spots, because remember, Brent Venables was on the hot seat there, right? They had this. Everybody said going into the year they had one of the tougher schedules in the country, and they had to win that Michigan game for some